Hey everyone, welcome back to Falcon Central Radio on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. It's been so long that I forgot how to do the intro. I'm Aaron Freeman over at FalcFans.com. I'm joined with my friend Scott Karasik, who is at Sportsnot. We are back this week to catch up on we've been off for the last 2 weeks, and we will catch up on some of the Falcons news. We'll talk a little bit about the Falcons, or at least Atlanta hosting the Super Bowl 53 in a couple of years. We'll talk about some of the stuff that we heard coming out of OTAs early on. And, of course, we'll always answer you guys' mailbag questions at the end of the show. So, Scott, it's good to be back talking to you. Let's jump into this Super Bowl stuff right off the bat. Obviously, you guys probably know that the Falcons, or Atlanta, I'm sorry, not the Falcons, Atlanta, will be hosting the 2019 Super Bowl, Super Bowl 53. That's the 2019 Super Bowl of the 2018 season. They actually won that bid over the hated city of New Orleans. It's going to be a big couple of years for Atlanta in terms of sports and getting big events. They'll have the national championship game for the college playoff in 2018. Then they'll have the Super Bowl in 2019, and then they'll have the Final Four in 2020.
And how much would it put money like a WrestleMania or a SummerSlam comes in during that time too?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, the good thing about having a new stadium is you're going to get a lot of big events early in that stadium's history. As people know, Mercedes-Benz Stadium is supposed to open next June. It will, I think they'll start hosting soccer games next summer for MLS, and then they'll start hosting Falcon games in August and September. So I guess, Scott, this is the question that a lot of people have been opining about, and Evan Birchfield asked us a mailbag question. Will the Falcons be the first team to play in a Super Bowl they host in their own stadium?
I mean, it'd be great if that happens, but I'm not going to project that 3 years out. I mean, we got to have the 2016 season, the 2017 season, and then the Falcons have to have a really good 2018 season. If Aaron's right about this rebuild, that's about when the Falcons should be getting good, as long as they stick with Dan Quinn. And by good, I mean like really good, not like can win 5 games against a shitty schedule like they did last year. Good. Not 8-8 on an average year. Good. Where 8-8 against a rough year like this year is going to be good. Although I think they could end up being 9-7 or 10-6. They just got to get a little bit of luck.
Okay.
So
yeah,
I
was expecting.
predict the luck swinging in our direction. But no, I don't think the Falcons are the first to host a Super Bowl in their own stadium.
Okay. I thought, since you're the more optimistic one, I figured there was a decent chance that you would say yes on this one, and I would have to be the doom and gloom guy. So at least I'm not going to die on that hill alone. Yeah, I don't think the Falcons are probably going to be a Super Bowl team by 2018. I think probably they're more on track for the 2019 or 2020 season is where if all their ducks get in a row, that's when they should be a sort of a Super Bowl team. When you look at the history of, the curse, I guess that some people call it, of the host city, the team that has the host city is not very good. Obviously, Falcon fans probably remember what happened back in 1999, the year after the Falcons went to the Super Bowl. They were terrible that season. And you go through it and you start looking at it and it's like, wow, this is sort of a thing. Now, our curse is real. It's up to you to decide. But it is one of those things where it is interesting that for the most part, teams that host a Super Bowl or cities that host a Super Bowl, that team in that year typically struggles to make the playoffs. And when they do, like the Cardinals a couple of years ago, they get sort of embarrassed with, Drew Stanton at quarterback or Ryan Lindley or whoever the heck was the quarterback back then. So I don't think the Falcons will be the team to break the curse, but it's nice to dream. Maybe it's possible. It's possible. I wouldn't bet on it, though.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're the team that breaks the curse, but hopefully they make the playoffs. Hopefully, hopefully they're heading into their second straight championship game. That'd be ideal, but like, I'm just being realistic here. I don't see it happening.
Yeah.
It's a 1 in 32 shot, 3 years out. Like, put money on it if you want to like make a hell of a ton of money and put like $10 on the Falcons winning the Super Bowl in their own stadium and being the first team to do it. Because the odds on that are probably going to be ridiculous. Like, you probably got 1,000-to-1 odds.
Yeah, probably.
And if you lose $10 on 1,000-to-1 odds, whatever, no big deal. You win, if you win that bet, you look like a genius and you just made 10 G's for absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of things, for the cost of a Chick-fil-A value meal and a Coke, and still have $2 to spare for like a pretzel at this new stadium. Not gonna lie, love those prices. That's probably the best thing that got announced in the last 3 weeks, is the like realistic, legitimate prices. Hey, yeah, a basket of fries and chicken fingers is gonna cost you $6. Like, going to Zaxby's would cost you $6 for that.
Yeah.
And a drink would be another $2. So just like Zaxby's. So basically it's like going to Zaxby's, only instead of having like crinkle cut fries, they're waffle fries. Like, woohoo.
Okay. You broke it down. There you go. So, Scott, I got to ask you, since you live in Atlanta, I live in North Carolina, do you plan on going to the Super Bowl, regardless of whether the Falcons are in it or not?
I don't know if I'll be in Atlanta 3 years from now. It all depends. Like, if you asked me 3 years ago where I was going to be, I was in Charleston. I was saying, you know what? I don't know. I'll probably still be in Charleston for the rest of my life. Got a couple job opportunities, moved home, and that's what happens. I mean, right now, I just, hopefully I'm still here. I would love to go to it. I would absolutely love to go to the Super Bowl. But I'm not going to go to the Super Bowl if it's not the Falcons, or at least a team that I can respect in it, aka not the Saints.
Okay.
Well, like, if it's Steelers, I'll go in a heartbeat.
Well, I mean, if the Saints are in it, it'd be fun to go to the game and root against the Saints, especially if the other team does, in fact, win. That would be a very thrilling event.
Yeah, but what if it's like the Patriots and Tom Brady's like 43 and like finally about to leave? And you're just like, dude, get the hell out of the freaking NFL. We're done.
Or you could tell your grandkids you saw Tom Brady's last game. I don't know. That might be something.
It wouldn't be worth it. Like, I'm a huge football fan. I've got Tom Brady's rookie card chilling in a shoebox in my townhouse right here. Somewhere. I don't know where it is, but it's in a shoebox somewhere. And whatever. I'm sure that like that card's worth something. Whatever. It's been sitting on that same shoebox since I was 12 years old.
Okay. All right, Scott, let's catch up on some OTA talk. I guess the biggest thing coming out of OTAs was the Falcons worked out Brandon Boykin yesterday. They did not sign him. Apparently they got to do some medical background checks or whatever based off of an ESPN report. But it's interesting because while we were off, the Falcons basically by Von McClure, ESPN basically said that they weren't planning on signing Leon Hall. So they bring in Boykin, so maybe they're planning on signing him. We'll see how that goes. But it's very clear that the Falcons are still looking for some cornerback depth in lieu of Jalen Collins' 4-game suspension to start the year. What are your thoughts on what Boykin could potentially bring to the table for Atlanta?
I mean, when you want a legitimate nickel cornerback and a guy who could compete for a return man spot, I think Brandon Boykin kind of does a little bit of both. I realize that Boykin may not have been a returner during his college, or not during his college, during his pro days, but I do like his overall player profile. I think he's got great ball skills. coming out in the draft, I had a first-round grade right before he tore his ACL in that Senior Bowl. Had he not torn his ACL in the Senior Bowl and basically missed part of his first season, I mean, or not missed part of his first season, but like missed part of the preseason and like been a backup most of his first season, I probably would have had him, I don't know, like middle of the first round. And right now he's like he went in the fourth round instead. He was that good at Georgia. Like no joke, that good at Georgia. And in the pros, I think he's been good. He had 1 year in Philly where he put up 6 picks and 2 forced fumbles, and then Chip Kelly being Chip Kelly said, "Oh, I don't care about actually good cornerback play." And then in Pitt last year, he was probably the best cornerback on that roster, and they let him walk because they're dumb. So he went to Carolina. Carolina needs corners, but they've got a certain thing that they want with this scheme. So they're like, oh, okay, well, we don't need Boykin. We just drafted 3 corners in the draft. Atlanta should sign him, bring him in, watch him be, Kevin Mathis or any of the other good nickel corners that they've had throughout the years. And, he's a Georgia guy. He's born in Atlanta, raised in Atlanta. I would love to see Boykin in Atlanta, especially if it's a cheap contract, 1 year, $1 million, 1 year, $2 million prove it type deal. All day. Why not?
Yeah, I do like Boykin. I remember him being a very good returner in Georgia, and I do think if the Falcons signed him, he would be in the mix to potentially replace Devin Hester as the returner. Even though you're right, I think he only returned kicks as a rookie in Philadelphia, and then they decided to make him more as a full-time nickel guy. For a while, he was I think Pro Football Focus's highest graded nickel cornerback for a couple of those years in Philly. And then, obviously he's bounced around the league, didn't play all that much in Pittsburgh. Obviously Carolina decided that they were moving in another direction. The interesting thing is it's a little interesting because Boykin is a little on the smaller side, very good in the slot, but he doesn't sort of fit the traditional sort of corner that the Falcons look for. You can make an argument that the Falcons had a similar player, not quite as explosive, in Kevin White last year, and they decided to not keep him on the roster after a pretty good training camp in preseason. So it's interesting that the Falcons are sort of, I wouldn't say backtracking, but are saying, oh, that wasn't so bad. It seemed like Kevin White lost a roster spot just because of his size more so than his ability. And so now they're looking at Boykin, and I think it would be a good signing if the Falcons got him.
I think Boykin's a lot better than Kevin White ever was, though. Kevin White was maybe a 5th or 6th round guy coming out in the draft. Boykin was way better.
I can't dispute it because Boykin has played at a high level in the NFL. I think Boykin's definitely a much better athlete than Kevin White ever will be. So I'm not going to dispute your point, but I think Kevin White was pretty good, but obviously I think he's not on anybody's team right now. So clearly other teams don't think that. So, we got a question about Leon Hall. Evan Birchfield asked your opinion on the Falcons passing on signing Leon Hall.
If they passed on signing Leon Hall to get Brandon Boykin because Leon Hall's got some injuries and because Boykin's been generally healthy and effective as a pro, I'm okay with it. I mean, I don't love the idea of passing on Leon Hall if Leon Hall's out there. I'd honestly love to get Hall and Boykin and just have them all battle it out. As opposed to having who are the corners right now? Jordan Sefon, Devontae Johnson, DeMarcus Van Dyke, CJ Goodwin. And if you're going in your head right now, who the hell are these guys? You're not alone. A lot of guys out there were saying the same thing. David Mims II. These guys blow for the most part. There's a reason why none of them got drafted. The Falcons legitimately need to sign someone at reserve corner, at least for the 4 games that Jalen Collins is going to be out. And then when Collins comes back, let him battle it out. Because I do think Collins is going to take the next step and at least be competent for the nickel role. And maybe CJ Goodwin does turn it around and become something. But, I mean, Devontae Johnson played at Weber State, wasn't very good. David Mims played at Texas State, wasn't very good. Jordan Stephon, St. Cloud State. If you're going, where the hell is that? I wish I could tell you. I mean, it's St. Cloud, Minnesota. I don't even know where that is. I don't see any of those 3 guys sticking, even on the practice squad. I think the best bet for the Falcons' top 5 corners right now would be Trufant, Collins, Alford. Obviously, Alford plays in the base package, and Collins comes in on nickel. Ideally, you bring in Boykin, and then you have that last spot battled out between Van Dyke and Goodwin. And obviously, you let those guys battle it out through the first 4 games of the season, and even Akeem King. So let those 3 guys battle it out for that last spot. Let 2 of them battle it out through the season, through the first 4 games of the season. And whoever comes out at the end after the first 4 games, you let him be the guy who makes the roster. So we might have CJ Goodwin as a cornerback for all we know.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because I think cornerback is the most unsettled position on the Falcons roster right now. I look at it and I see 3 NFL caliber cornerbacks on the roster, and you need 5. I think you can probably afford to have one of these guys, whether it's Akeem King or Van Dyke or one of these undrafted rookies, as your 5th corner as a project, a developmental project. But I don't necessarily know if you can afford to have 2 of those guys. Obviously, Collins is going to be suspended for the first 4 games, so really you only have 2 guys right now. And you're going to need to have 4 by the time you get to week 1. So I do think whether it's Leon Hall, whether it's Brandon Boykin, whether it's somebody else, I fully expect the Falcons to add at least 1 cornerback between now and September, whenever, when the season starts. 1 veteran at least, and if not 2, maybe even 3 between now and then. So this is going to be a position to monitor. But I think the Falcons are probably going to take their time in terms of signing guys because they want to get some of these young guys reps, particularly guys like King and Van Dyke. To see what they can do. Obviously, Collins needs his reps, as many reps as he can possibly get before he gets suspended, since he's not going to have any sort of margin for error. The expectation is once he comes back in week 5, he's going to have to be able to play at a high level. So we'll see how it goes. But I certainly think regardless of the Falcons passing on Leon Hall, there's going to be at least somebody signed in the next, 3 months before the season starts at cornerback. So, guys, the Falcons made a couple of low-level roster moves. We'll briefly touch on those. They signed 3 guys from their tryout undrafted free agents: David Glidden, Shabazz Ahmed, Brandon Williams. They cut 4 guys, and then with the extra roster spot, they brought in Lawrence Gibson, who was a 7th-round pick for the Cowboys last year and spent last year on the Chiefs practice squad. We got a mailbag question from Vienna Falcons on Gibson. He asked, any thoughts on Lawrence Gibson, another starter out of nowhere like we saw last year, or just a pure depth signing?
Oh, I think he's a pure depth signing. Unless they move him to guard and they think that he's, ready to go and he's, the ideal fit for a guard. I honestly think that's all he is, just pure, unadulterated depth.
Yeah, I think he's probably going to stick at tackle. He's got athleticism. He's a little raw, or a lot raw, I guess. It's going to be interesting to see if he can sort of unseat either Compton or Harris. I do see both Compton and Harris making the team. And sorry about the noise. Distracted me for a second. I think both Compton and Harris are pretty good bets to make the roster, and maybe Gibson has a chance to unseat one of those guys. So it'll be interesting to see if he takes advantage of that opportunity, because he certainly does have the athleticism that Kyle Shanahan and this offense wants on the offensive line over those two other guys?
I mean, I think he's a better athlete. I think he's a better fit at, say, right tackle than like Bryce Harris or Tom Compton are. I think those guys project athletically more as left tackles. And I realize if you've got Tom Compton as your left tackle, you're basically fucked. But for use of a better word, I do realize that Tom Compton should not play left tackle in the NFL. Got a nice motorcycle rally going on over there.
Yeah, it's this dude in my neighborhood. I guess he got his Harley overhauled. He's just been riding up and down the street for the last week for no reason.
Sounds about right.
I can grab my headphones if you want.
Nah, you're good. But yeah, so I do think Lawrence Gibson does end up on the roster just because I think he's a better player than Bryce Harris is. I do think he's a better player than Tom Compton could be. But overall, like, you don't really have a lot of depth behind Schrader and Matthews. You really just have a bunch of B-level, C-level backup talent. Like, they're B-level for backups. So they're like C to D-level quality guys. I honestly would be fine with Wes Schweitzer as a backup left tackle over any of those three guys. Because at least he can hold off Carl Lawson.
Okay.
Yeah. I do like Lawrence Gibson, though. I do think that if they moved him to guard, it'd be a better fit. I honestly think he's probably like an A-level backup as a guard as opposed to a C-level backup at tackle. I'd rather have him on the roster than, say, I don't know. Let's see, James Stone. He could go. Ben Garland. He can go. Colin Rawrig. He can go. Mike Person. He can go. So, there you go.
Okay, there you go. We got another question that's kind of semi-related to this because we had some undrafted signings. Jelani234 asks, do you see any of the undrafted players making the team?
I think it's possible that we end up seeing anywhere between 3 and 4 making the team. Obviously, I don't see, barring injury, of course. Like, say Patrick DeMarco goes down, Will Rattel would make the team in a heartbeat because that's what he did. You know, he played fullback for North Dakota. Fullback and linebacker. I do think between Teron Ward, Gus Johnson, and Brandon Wiles, you're going to see Brandon Wiles come out of that as the guy who wins the job. I think he's the best athlete. I think he's the best all-around football player there. I do think out of the wide receivers, we're not going to see a single one unless they show up as just a baller returner and a guy who's like comes out of nowhere. Just absolutely comes out of nowhere. I think at tight end, Josh Perkins, he's good, but I don't see him making the roster over Toilolo or Tila Vea. On the offensive line, just don't hold your breath on any of those guys. They're all bad. All of them. Shabazz Ahmed, they try to make a big deal out of him signing in. Like, who is Shabazz Ahmed? He's not good. Like, he's not. He played for Temple. He looked awful. I would have rather signed as an undrafted free agent Jake Matthews' little brother Mike. I would have much rather had that for depth. On the defensive line, I'm not really seeing anybody who's like, oh my God, this guy's great. I mean, maybe Chris Mays earns a job competing with Joey Mbu. Maybe for the base nose tackle. Outside of that, I don't really see anybody earning a spot except maybe Sherrod Niesman at free safety. as that fifth safety on the roster, special teams guy, because he can cover deep. He's a great athlete. He has great range. As a true free safety, I think he's a good fit depth-wise behind Teresi and Ricardo Allen. And I think it's strong safety if you've got Ricardo Allen, Teresi, Neesman, Keanu Neal, Ishmael. I think you've got a good group of safeties there that has potential for long-term. And then at kicker, I think we could be shocked to see Nick Rose. So if I had to pick any guys that make it, if I had to pick the three that I think will make the roster, I think you're going to see Brandon Wiles. I think you're going to see Brandon Wiles, Sherrod Neesman, and I think Nick Rose would be the three guys that would make the roster. And I realize that saying Nick Rose makes the roster is saying Matt Bryant either retires or gets cut. I think it's possible he just retires and says, you know what, I'm done with this. I don't really feel like competing for a job this year. I feel like I've earned my spot. And then, like, the Falcons come to him like, hey, dude, we're going to cut you for the money. And then he just retires.
Okay. It's an interesting take. Yeah, I think that would have to happen, even though I thought I read a quote a couple of weeks ago that Matt Bryant said he wasn't thinking about retiring. So
no one ever thinks about actually retire.
I guess. Yeah, that's probably accurate.
He's going to be the next Morton Anderson. Probably not.
I mean, I think part of the issue with Matt Bryant is, like, I think the only reason Matt Bryant loses his job is from poor play. That's basically what I'm getting at. Because I think his contract is, I think his base salary is guaranteed in some way. I can't recall off the top of my head. But, or a portion of his base salary is guaranteed. And they're not going to cut him unless he sucks, which I don't expect him to suck because Matt Bryant doesn't suck. I'm looking at, as far as under, what was that?
It's not guaranteed. Last year's base salary was. This year's isn't.
Okay. I thought there was a guaranteed thing that kicked in March, but I could be misremembering. Okay, sorry, got distracted. I think for undrafted guys making the team, I don't see anybody on offense really making the team unless someone really lights it up and a couple of guys get hurt. I just think the Falcons are pretty much they know exactly the 25 or so players that they're going to keep on offense. All those guys are already on the team. I think the real competition and the real sort of fluidity on the roster is going to be on defense. I think they're probably pretty set at linebacker. They've been talking up Ivan McClellan a lot, so it'll be interesting to see if he gets into the mix, maybe as a strong side linebacker. But I think if you're really looking at the defense, the areas of the roster that I think are still a little unsettled are defensive line and in the secondary, particularly at the cornerback position, like we just talked about a couple of minutes ago. So I think, basically undrafted free agents, because they're undrafted free agents, it's really more about opportunity and skill level. So if you have the opportunity, we've seen guys like Joey Mbu and Darren Walls in recent years, and obviously Robinson Therese, among others, make the team because they had opportunities, because the team was pretty weak at depth at certain positions going into those seasons. So I'm looking at this, particularly in the secondary. I like Neesman. I like Poole. I think both of those guys are talented. I think safety, we're a little better than we are at cornerback, but I think Poole gives you some flexibility to play some slot corner. I think Poole's a pretty good safety prospect. I think you can make a decent argument that, apples to apples, Brian Poole versus Ricardo Allen as a safety, you can make a decent argument that Poole might edge him out just slightly just because he's a little bit more physical. But, not to suggest that Brian Poole's going to be starting for the Falcons this year. I'm just saying, I think he has some developmental upside similar to Ricardo Allen. Defensive line, I'm not looking at anybody that really sort of stands out to me that I'm like, oh, yeah, that guy has a really good shot at making a roster. But because I do feel like the Falcons' defensive line depth is going to be very much in flux between now and the start of the season, because there's several guys that we're going to be bringing in the camp that I don't necessarily see making the roster at all. Then I do think if someone like a Brandon Williams or Chris Mays or Corey Johnson has a good summer, there's a decent chance that they could sort of sneak onto the roster as like the 10th defensive lineman or something like that, and just basically be inactive every week like Joey Moo was last year. So yeah, I mean, like I don't think this year's going to be like last year where we had like 3 or 4 guys make the roster. I think you might see 1 or 2 tops. I think more than likely if the Falcons are in a position where they're keeping an undrafted free agent, it's going to be they probably could do better by signing a veteran at the end of camp off the waiver wire. But we'll see how it goes. There's always a couple of guys that surprise you every summer. So I won't sit here and say that no one won't make the team, but it's not. I don't think it's as sort of flexible as it was last summer, where there was a lot more of an open competition for certain roster spots.
I think that's fair. I honestly think that Sherrod Neesman, out of all the safeties on the roster, might be the most athletic.
Threes, he's pretty athletic. I know he tested very well last year at his pro day. But you might be right.
Outside of bomb speed in the 40, Neesman tested better, which is weird to believe. But when you watch it on film, it's very easy to see.
Yeah, I don't think that's a crazy statement to say that Neesman's athleticism is better than anybody else's. I do, but I do think, yeah, whatever. You guys know. All right, Scott, you want to jump into these mailbag questions?
Yeah, we should.
All right. First one comes from Vienna Falcons. He says, thoughts on Hegeman and Tyson Jackson switching positions?
I think it's basically the Falcons saying Tyson Jackson's on his way out and that Hegeman is going to be potentially taking over that 5 technique role in the base. I don't love the fit there. I know Aaron does. But if it means that the base package is basically Hegeman, say Mbu, Babineau, and Upshaw, I think it brings in better pass rushers or the best pass rushing group that they've got for that. I remember in 2014, Hegeman ragdolled Jari Evans coming off of a 5 technique play. And 5 technique for a guy like Hegeman is like a 9 technique for a guy like Ezekiel Ansah. It just allows him to get a little bit more speed and a better angle coming toward the quarterback as a pass rusher. So it does make sense. I don't love his fit. I still think his best fit's at 3 tech. I hope I'm proven wrong. I hope he does look good at 5 tech, and I hope, he looks like the next J.J. Watt, I don't see it happening, but I hope he looks like it. Because at least when he does come in on as a 3 tech, it'll be better. If he can eke out 3 sacks in that new role and everything else stays the same and he just plays solid run defense and ekes out those 3 sacks, I think the Falcons did a good job because they'll have the guy who can provide pass rush in a spot that they were literally getting nothing. Just like I think Upshaw on the other side at Leo, whether it's Upshaw or Brooks Reed playing Leo in the base, I think Brooks Reed has a shot there, especially with Beasley taking over the starting strong side linebacker role. Let's not act like it's not happening. It's happening. You don't take a guy number 8 overall, move him positions so you can make sure he's got a spot in the base, and then not start him. It doesn't make any sense. And I think in the nickel, we're going to see Beasley moved around a lot like he was in college, a lot like Corey Bierman was moved around back in 2012, where he was blitzing from pretty much everywhere and attacking the quarterback from pretty much everywhere. Now, I don't love Corey Bierman anymore. Loved him in 2012. Hate him since then. But right now, I think you've got a good, solid starter and a good, solid pass rushing group coming up that will actually be able to pass rush the quarterback in the base now. And I think moving Babineau back to the 3 tech and base It takes them off the field on third downs in the pass rush set, which I know Aaron's probably not a huge fan of. But it does give the Falcons a legitimate starting 3 technique who knows the role and who can provide pass rush in the base. So, again, while I don't love the move, I do think this move basically says, get the fuck out of here, Tyson Jackson. You're not worth it anymore. We're going to cut you and take all the money that we save and spend it on people that are actually worth it. Next offseason, when the Falcons have right around, $70 million in cap space, and should probably re-sign guys like Robert Alford.
Okay. You hit a lot there, Scott, so I'll just sort of dance my way around it. To me, this is interesting. I've been saying for over a year now that I think Hegeman sort of is a better fit in that 5-tech spot that Red Bryant played in Dan Quinn's defense, just because I think his length is not is more effective outside than it is inside. And I think we saw that throughout last year. There's times where he really struggles to get leverage because he's so long and so tall. I don't think that's going to be as big an issue playing outside. But I do think this move, at least for Hegeman, I think is partially a lot of this, the shuffling of the defensive line. I think is a lot. To be honest, I don't really know what the Falcons are doing. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, but I do think a lot of this may be more so just kind of, we're going to try some things. This is the point in the year where we can try some things and get away with it because we're not playing games. And I don't necessarily know with all the stuff that they're talking about doing now is necessarily going to be what they're doing when we get to September. So I do think this move for Hegeman, particularly, I think is more designed, not necessarily because he's going to permanently move to defensive end. I think it's partially driven to see if he can add some versatility and help make Tyson Jackson much more expendable than apparently the Falcons seem to think he is today. Honestly, I don't understand why Tyson Jackson is still on the team. This is not a knock against Tyson Jackson, but considering his salary, considering his sort of limited skill set, and the fact that, if the Falcons keep him on the roster week 1, they have to guarantee his entire base salary, which is like $4.5 million, which for a guy that's only going to play 20, 25 snaps, that makes absolutely no sense unless you're a situational pass rusher as a defensive lineman. So it's one of those things where, I still struggle to understand why Tyson Jackson still has a roster spot. Him playing inside a defensive tackle, I don't see why that he's never really been that good of a defensive tackle. He played mostly end at LSU. He played exclusively 5 technique at Kansas City. Obviously, he's played pretty much predominantly 5 technique, except for the occasional times with it. Obviously in 2014 he played a lot of 3 technique, but last year he played in a pinch inside. So I don't understand why the Falcons sort of see him as a asset there. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. As far as the Falcons sort of shuffling around their base and sort of nickel defense with Babineau moving to the 3 tech. I don't have a problem with Babineau playing 3 technique in the base defense. I do think people are getting a little ahead of themselves. I don't necessarily know if Babineau isn't still our best interior pass rusher. So I do feel like if you're going to try to limit Babineau's reps this year, which makes perfect sense considering he's 100 years old at this point, if you're going to do that, then I think you still want to maximize his ability as a nickel pass rusher until Grady Jarrett shows that he's a better pass rusher than Jonathan Babineau, which he hasn't done yet. I don't think I think you're going to be hurting your nickel pass rush by moving Babineau to the base. But again, this is why you do these things in May and June and July and August to find these things out, as opposed to, this is what we're doing right now. So we'll see how it plays out. I think the defensive line competition is going to be one of the more interesting battles to look at in training camp to see how they sort of Falcons shuffle the rotation, because they seem to have a lot of options. They seem to be able to throw a lot of different combinations out there. And I think now they're sort of tinkering with certain combinations to see what works best. And, we'll see how it plays out over the course of the year. I think we just answered Luke's question about Babineau moving to 3-tech. So we'll answer Luke's next question, which is about linebackers. Do you see Deion Jones playing Malcolm Smith's role this year? Is he an exclusive nickel and special teams guy?
This year, maybe. It all depends on how well he takes to an NFL strength program. I know we talk about, LSU and the SEC. It might as well be the NFL and all that. He's still a young guy. He's only 22 years old. He's only 21 right now. He doesn't turn 22 till November. So despite being like a redshirt senior by the time he got to his final year at LSU, he still doesn't have a lot of miles on his frame and doesn't have a fully – he hadn't filled his frame out or come anywhere near it. And I think Aaron would agree with me here. Like, he's got the space to add up to another 20 pounds over the next 3 years. Bobby Wagner was like 245 coming out, but Bobby Wagner was also damn near 24 years old coming out too. So he was a little bit older and had some more time in strength programs, understanding his body, learning what was going on. And I still don't even think 245 is where they're going to try and get Deion Jones long term. I think 235 is what his max weight's going to be. Maybe even just 230. As long as he can hold up at the point of attack and get stronger, that's what matters. And I think considering his role is basically going to be dropping back in the middle of the defense, covering a large swath of area the way Wagner does, I think early on at least he's going to be very good, and it's going to be a good fit for him within the scheme. And I do think he starts at middle linebacker all year long. I don't think he's a nickel and special teamer early on. I think that's probably Devondre Campbell's role, as opposed to Deion Jones's role.
Okay. Yeah, I don't get all the talk that people are having about guys subbing in, different linebackers subbing in the nickel. I haven't seen Dan Quinn do that. Very few teams in the NFL really do that at this point. Basically, if you're not good enough to play on third down, you don't play. So it is one of those things where the idea of Campbell or Jones, replacing Warlow, like if you're starting at middle linebacker and weak side linebacker, you're going to play every snap. That's the bottom line, I think.
Pretty much.
So, like, if you're not good enough to play every snap, then you shouldn't be starting at those positions, basically, is what I'm saying. So I do think Deion Jones probably will start games this year. I don't necessarily see that happening week one, but I do think there may be a point in the season where the Falcons may be on the outside looking in on the playoffs, because obviously you guys probably know I'm not as high on their sort of playoff hopes this year as others are, like Scott. And I do think, obviously I don't have a very high opinion of Paul Warlow. So I think at a certain point you're just kind of like, right, why are we playing this guy? And let's get the young guy some reps. So I think Deion Jones, there's a very good chance that he finishes the year as the starting middle linebacker, but I don't necessarily know if it's a great chance that he begins the year. Because I do think, at least, and you guys can go check it out on foulplanes.com. I just published my scouting report on Deion Jones. It's a pretty long read, but I think it's a very thorough read. I think his floor is a lot lower than I think a lot of people think it is. And I don't necessarily – he's not the type of player that I would look at and say, oh, yeah, he's definitely a guy that could be a starter day one in the NFL. I do think the thing that Deion Jones does bring to the table that is going to, regardless of how his career goes as a starter or backup or whatever at linebacker, I do think his special teams ability is going to be an asset for the Falcons. I think he's an outstanding special teams player. So I think he's always going to earn his paycheck on special teams, regardless of what happens whether he starts or is a high-level starter or whatever you think his defensive capability is. So I think that's really going to be where the Falcons start him at this year, play some special teams for us, be a backup, see what you can do, and then we'll see as the season goes along how the Falcons play, how Warlow plays, how Deion Jones takes to everything. Then I think they might start working him into the lineup as we get along in the season. But as far as the Malcolm Smith role, that was really, I guess I'm trying to think. The Seahawks did do that where they subbed in Malcolm Smith and nickel back when they won the Super Bowl, and that was weird. I guess that sort of negates what I just said about Dan Quinn doesn't do that, but I don't see Deion Jones really being that guy right away. I think he can eventually be that guy, maybe year 2, but we'll see.
I do think that Deion Jones, right away, is that starter. I know that we're going to deal with growing pains. That's just what I think there. But the Malcolm Smith role that you're talking about, they did the same thing with who's the guy who's starting at weak side? Just brain farted on it. The current weak side guy played at Mississippi State. Why do I know his college not? Who? Yeah, KJ Wright. They did the same thing with KJ Wright coming out. Played him at nickel linebacker, and they basically subbed out their will on nickel downs and put in a speedy coverage backer. So I don't see why it wouldn't work.
Okay. I thought my recollection was KJ Wright started as a rookie because Lofa Tupu got hurt.
Because what happened?
Because Tupu. Oh no, it was Aaron Curry got hurt. That's what it was.
Aaron Curry got hurt, but Aaron Curry wasn't very good in the first place.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying that's why KJ Wright started playing, not because.
It was partly that, but they were doing a platoon. They weren't having KJ Wright play every snap.
Okay. All right. Next question from Luke is, who will have the better career in Atlanta, Devondre Campbell or Deion Jones?
That's a tough one because both Devondre Campbell and Deion Jones fit the scheme to a T. I just have a hard time seeing – I think Jones will probably have a better career, and you'll see Devondre Campbell as that average starter, like a Steven Nicholas, like a KJ Wright, like one of those. I'll be perfectly happy with that out of Devondre Campbell. But I think Campbell's niche is going to be covering tight ends. I think that's going to be his true forte, and I think that's where the Falcons drafted him for. I think Deion Jones as a whole is going to be a better all-around linebacker when all said and done. Again, he's still young. It's not like we're getting a polished product here. He hadn't played a lot of college football, so.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done a deep dive into Campbell yet. I'm still working my way through the Falcons rookie draft class. I've watched, 3 games, so it's not like I don't have an opinion on this, but I can more definitively answer this question next week just because by then I should have watched all the tape I want to watch on Campbell. Right now, though, I honestly think it's kind of a coin flip right now because I think they're kind of equal players at this point. I think Jones does certain things better than Campbell. I think Campbell does certain things better than Jones. And to me, it's going to be interesting to see which one of those strengths sort of plays out better. I think Campbell is a lot more physical than Jones is. And I tend to think physicality matters a little bit more at linebacker than speed, but obviously Jones probably is a much more faster and rangier player. I don't necessarily see both of those guys being long-term starters for the Falcons. I think between the two of them, one of them should emerge as a starter at the weak side linebacker long-term. But I don't imagine a scenario where, the Falcons are playing in the 2019 Super Bowl where both Devondre Campbell and Deion Jones are starting linebackers on that defense, assuming no injuries or anything like that. But, right now, I think it's a coin flip. I feel like Jones is going to, because he's a second-round pick, he's going to get opportunities that Campbell's not going to get. And But I do feel like if Campbell was able to take advantage of the opportunities, then, like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I don't have a definitive answer at this point, but I think it could go either way. So, like, part of me wants to lean towards Campbell right now because I think he might be a little bit better than Jones, but I do feel like Jones's second round status is going to afford him opportunities that Campbell is not going to get. That's just kind of the nature of the NFL. We saw that with Corey Peters and Parade Jerry with Vance Walker. Vance Walker was better than both of those guys early on, but Vance Walker was buried on the depth chart because he was a 7th round pick and those guys were 1st and 3rd round picks. So I feel like that could be a similar situation for Jones and Campbell in the future. I don't think it's going to be as drastic as that, but we'll have to see how it plays out. Okay. Jelani234, I guess we can put a button on the linebacker situation. He asks, how do you see the linebackers positions working out and who will be the starters?
All right. Brace yourself. This is going to be a long explanation.
Okay.
I think the Falcons wind up keeping, we'll just say 5 off-ball linebackers, and they'll have 2 guys that they play as strong side linebacker in the base that make the roster. I think, actually, we'll say a total of 8 linebackers because I think Tyler Starr finally does make the roster this year. I think you've got Sean Weatherspoon. I think Devondre Campbell, Paul Warlow, Deion Jones, and Philip Wheeler are your 5 off-ball guys. I think Weatherspoon and Jones start in base with Jones as the mic. And I think in the nickel, you got Jones and Campbell. I think at the strong side linebacker spot, you're going to have Vic Beasley start. And Brooks Reed and Tyler Starr will make the roster. The only question is whether they end up as Tyler Starr playing like more of a, what's the word? Tyler Starr playing more of a Leo or Tyler making more of a, Tyler playing more of like a true strong side backer. But I do think he makes the roster. I think when it comes to the nickel, you'll end up seeing Beasley and Reed and Upshaw and those guys playing more Leo than anything else.
Okay. All right, that wasn't as long as I thought it was going to be. Okay. I sort of go with the conservative prediction here. I think the starters are going to be Brooks Reed, Paul Warlow, and Sean Weatherspoon. Obviously, injuries certainly could play a factor in there, particularly with Weatherspoon and Reed. But I think the Falcons are going to go with veteran guys that kind of know what they're doing, and I don't necessarily know that describes Campbell or Jones at this point. I think if between Weatherspoon and Philip Wheeler, I see one of those guys making the team. I think Weatherspoon has the leg up. I think the Falcons see him as the starter at weak side linebacker over Wheeler. I think Wheeler is more seen as a depth guy, but I do think because of Deion Jones' versatility and Campbell's potential versatility that it sort of makes Wheeler a little expendable at this point. But I won't sit here and say there's no shot at Wheeler making the team. I just think he's probably on the bubble right now.
Oh, yeah. Definitely on the bubble.
I think the Falcons will wind up keeping 6 spots at that spot. I do think Reed, Wheeler, Campbell, and Jones and Warlow. I'm not sorry. Why did I say Wheeler? Reed, Campbell, Jones, and Warlow are locks. I think Weatherspoon and Wheeler will battle over one of those spots, and whoever wins will be the starter. And then the 6th spot, I think we'll have to see, if Ivan McClennan is as good as, they've been hyping him up early on, he might get that spot. Tyler Starr is in the mix to get that spot. I did a roster prediction earlier this month, and I had Leroy Reynolds fill in that spot just because he's a proven special teams guy, and that's basically what whoever wins that spot is going to basically play special teams. So, I think that's probably what it comes down to. to begin this season, you're probably looking at 6 guys, and then we'll see how it plays out over the course of the season. If the Falcons decide to, they want to give an opportunity. As I said before, I don't see Jones or Campbell starting week 1 unless there's an injury. But by the end of the year, I think there's a pretty good chance that one or both of those guys will be getting into the starting mix because, the Falcons linebacker situation is pretty much everybody other than those 2 rookies is operating on a 1-year deal. And we may see a possibility where those 2 guys are the only people currently linebackers on the team today that are going to be on the team next year. They could get rid of Reed, Warlow, Weatherspoon, Wheeler, Reynolds, Starr, all those guys by the time we get to 2017. So it's gonna, that's gonna be another interesting battle to see this season and this summer to see if anybody sort of emerges as a guy that can be a long-term option besides those 2 rookies.
Oh man.
Okay. The Dirty Bird 1998, that is Luke, asks another question. He says, what will the Falcons starting base and nickel defenses be week 1?
I mean, there's so much to go through, but best guess as of right now, if I had to guess, week 1, I'd say the base defense would probably be Upshaw, Grady Jarrett, Rashid Hegeman, and Derek Shelby in the base at defensive line. Weatherspoon, Jones, and Beasley as your linebacking core. Trufant, Alford, Allen, and Neal as your secondary. The secondaries are easy to predict. If Collins wasn't injured, or not injured, wasn't suspended for the first 4 weeks, he'd be the starting corner in the nickel. But I think week 1, hopefully they sign Brandon Boykin, so I'm going to pick that right now. Trufant, Alford, Boykin, Allen, and Neal. I think at linebacker you've got Deion Jones and Devondre Campbell. I think the pass rush set's going to be Beasley, Babineau, Shelby, and Claiborne.
Mm-hmm.
If you like gun to my head, what are you projecting for week 1? That's what I would project week 1.
Yeah, I mean, this is a hard question because, again, as I said earlier, I do think we're going to see a lot of competition and sort of see how things – we're going to really – August is going to be the time where this thing shakes out. But right now, I'd probably say week 1 base defensive line is probably Shelby, Jarrett, Hegeman, and Beasley. Linebackers are obviously, I just said Reed, Warlow, and Weatherspoon. Obviously, you guys know who the 4 starters in the secondary are I hope you do. That's Trufant, Alford, Allen, and Neal. The nickel, I think Beasley, Babineau, probably Shelby and Claiborne are going to be your 4 main pass rushers. You probably swap in maybe Jarrett for Shelby. I don't know. Linebackers are going to be Warlow and Weatherspoon, and your nickel cornerback is going to be a veteran to be named later. Maybe it's Brandon Boykin, maybe it's somebody else. But I don't think that guy is currently on the roster. I don't think it's going to be Akeem King or DeMarcus Van Dyke. So,
not unless they feel like the Bucs have nobody worth really defending. I mean, let's look at those first 4 games of the season. You got Tampa Bay, who doesn't really have a slot guy, so that's okay. But then after that, I feel like you got a bunch of slot guys. I feel like the Raiders have a couple guys there. What's his name? Big guy. Andre Holmes. They bring in Andre Holmes, and they move Crabtree over to the slot, and you're done there. Crabtree's going to destroy any Falcon in the slot. The Saints, you got Brandon Cooks, who they're going to slide all around the formations, and they got Michael Thomas, they got Brandon Coleman, they got Willie Snead. They actually have some decent, solid receivers, much to our dismay. And then the Panthers in the slot, they'll actually put Ted Ginn where he belongs this year with Kelvin Benjamin and Devin Funchess both healthy. And you'll have Ted Ginn and Corey Brown, a.k.a. Philly Brown, in the slot. So it won't be fun for the Falcons, but they'll have to have somebody there those first 4 weeks, especially with the division games.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because I think the Raiders' slot receiver is actually Seth Roberts, and
Even better than anybody the Falcons have to cover him.
Yeah, no, I do think it's going to be interesting because if the Falcons, under normal circumstances, they would move Alford to the slot, and that would take him off of Amari Cooper, which is going to be the guy he would normally line up with against. So to me, like, you want to have a slot-only corner so that you can keep Alfred on the outside in nickel situations against the Raiders. I think the Panthers are probably going to play Funches inside this year, just because that's basically what everybody sort of the consensus was he could be a Marcus Colston type inside. That makes the most sense, I think, more so than some of the other guys that they have on the roster. The Saints is going to be interesting because they sort of have a combination. Like, Brandon Coleman was their slot receiver last year when Colston went down, but maybe they think Thomas is going to be that guy. But they also have Cooks and Snead, who also play sometimes in the slot. So, they have the versatility. That's going to be an interesting matchup to see how the Falcons deal with that, because that is maybe a potentially a game where you do need to have Robert Alford slide down in the slot and cover whoever that person is. And who was the other? Tampa Bay? Yeah, Tampa Bay is – they put Vincent Jackson in the slot, so you do want, Alford to cover that guy often. So, I guess we're still waiting on the Bucs to sign Roddy White at some point, so I don't know how that's going to go. But, I think Murphy and Jackson are their primary slot receivers, so it's going to be an interesting matchup to see how the Falcons sort of figure that out. I think they definitely need to get somebody that is, whether that's Boykin, whether that's Hall, or whether that's somebody else, someone that is definitely a slot specialist more so than what Phillip Adams was last year. Phillip Adams was better on the outside than he was on the inside. And he's certainly better against size than he is against speed. That was something that gave him a lot of trouble last year. So, he'll still also be in the mix, I think, possibly, as a cheap veteran option. So, we'll see how the Falcons go. But I do think we're going to see a lot of potential shakeup with projecting some of these base and nickel packages. Certain guys, you're pretty much, the secondary is pretty much locked in who's going to be in the base and nickel. But I do think there's some fluidity and flexibility in the front seven on guys competing for roles. Beasley's going to be definitely a lock for the nickel. But outside of that, you can throw out a bunch of different combinations, and we'll see how the chips fall. Okay, Jelani234, looking at the roster, which group do you feel will be the most improved on defense or offense?
Offense, by far. I know that might sound a little counterintuitive because the offense was already pretty decent. But when you add in Austin Hooper and Mohamed Sanu to a group of receivers that needed a little bit of help last year, I realize that Aaron's not in love with Mohamed Sanu as a whole, but I think it's easy to say that Mohamed Sanu will be better in Atlanta than Roddy White was last year.
Starting receiving in the NFL last year. So, but yeah, I agree with you.
Pro Football Focus, congrats. Like, I don't really give a fuck what they think.
Okay.
Their grading system is done by a bunch of people who have never played football in their life. It was developed by a bunch of guys in England that, as much as I like their overall stats, and as much as I like their raw stats, I don't like their plus-minus grades, and I absolutely despise their wonky Madden grade style system now. Like, that's a fucking joke. That's an absolute fucking joke of a system. And if they think that's going to, make them more money or make them look more credible or make them easier to understand, it's not. They just look like assholes. Like, they legitimately look like assholes. They're going to lose out on a ton of subscription money because Collinsworth bought the site and said, let's turn shit around and fuck everything up. So that's what he did. A site that I was already like against their grades, wasn't a huge fan of their grades on, got way worse. And I realized that they're down on Sanu. They're down on pretty much everybody. Like, let's call it what it is. They don't know what the fuck they're doing. I'm not a fan of them. I'm really not. Oh, we watch every fucking snap. Congrats. So, no. I think Sanu is actually better than what he was given credit for. I think when you're being put in the spot where, oh, hey, you're always a number 3 wide receiver. Oh, hey, you're playing in the slot all the time. And he's most comfortable on the outside, not in the slot. That says something. If you're more comfortable as an outside receiver and you get moved to the slot all the time, what are you going to do? Try to make it the best of a bad situation. Marvin Jones wasn't getting moved to the slot. Sanu was getting moved to the slot. He's not a slot guy. He's an outside guy. So, again, I think he's going to be used where he wins in Atlanta, where I think in Cincinnati he wasn't. And I think that's going to be better for him. And I think you're underselling the amount of impact that having Alex Mack in the middle is really going to make for that offensive line. Because it's not just can he snap the ball. It's not just can he make line calls. It's all of it put together all at once. Him making a good line call on first down and a good snap on first down as opposed to a bad snap that throws all timing for a pass and Atlanta's behind schedule. So now they're at 2nd and 10 instead of, I don't know, 1st and 5 or 2nd and 5 or another 1st and 10 because they got the first down. Or because he makes a good line call and instead Matt Ryan doesn't feel pressure on that play because he made a good line call and because, he's sitting there and he actually took a block that Mike Person couldn't dream of taking against some of the better defensive tackles that the Falcons are playing this year. So, say he makes the right call against Aaron Donald on a first down, good snap, everything's good. Ryan throws a 8-yard out to Julio Jones that connects. It's a small play. It doesn't mean a lot in the long term to some, but that might be a play that we couldn't have made in 2015 because Mike Person and Andy Levitre were going to get just destroyed by Aaron Donald. Now with Mack in there, you at least stand a chance. You got a competent center, arguably the best center in the league, but a competent center, as opposed to a guy who was probably out of 32 starting centers, he was probably 30th in the grand scheme of things because he had no business playing center. Solid blocker, better off as a guard, but should have never played center in the NFL. I think that's going to be huge. And then having Austin Hooper for the red zone, I think having a better offensive line on the interior, having more cohesion this year as a group on the offensive line is going to help the run game in the red zone. And I think if they, keep Brandon Wilds or Gus Johnson and have some size for the red zone, that'll help out too.
Okay. Well, Scott, first to answer this question, I will say I hope it's the offense because the offense has the most room to improve. And if the Falcons are going to make the playoffs, it needs to be the offense. I think we kind of know what the defense is going to be, to answer Jelani's question. As for all the other things you say, like if I'm being honest, I don't agree probably with anything you just said. I have my issues with Pro Football Focus, but I don't think their assessment of Roddy White was inaccurate. Their decisions, business-related decisions aren't, I don't quite agree with them, but I understand why they did it because, there's like 25 NFL teams that pay them a lot of money to get their data. So clearly they're doing something right because the NFL teams are paying them hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to get their data. As for Alex Mack, I don't necessarily maybe I am underselling his impact, but I don't think he's the problem solver that he's been often painted to be because I do think at the end of the day, whether the Falcons have a good offensive line this year is going to depend on whether Jake Matthews can block Robert Quinn, whether Ryan Schrader can block Khalil Mack, whether Chris Chester can block Aaron Donald. And having Alex Mack in the middle, snapping the ball and getting good line calls isn't going to change those things. It's going to be up to the 5 individual players to block their guys. And, having a good center is great, and certainly can fill in some of the cracks that you have on your offensive line. But if Chris Chester can't block Fletcher Cox or Cameron Jordan or Aaron Donald, then you can have friggin' Jeff Saturday or Dermontti Dawson at center, and it doesn't really matter. So I think that's one of the issues I sort of have with some people that are, trying to pump up the Alex Mack signing, like, oh man, that means our offensive line is good. I think our offensive line is fine. Like, I don't have a problem with our offensive line, but if the issue that we had last season was whenever we faced talented pass rushers, our guys had a tendency to struggle a little bit. And they're going to face a lot more talented pass rushers than often they saw last year. Obviously, they faced some really good guys last year, J.J. Watt and whatnot. But it is one of those things where, the level of competition is going up this year. And so they're going to need Alex Mack to be every bit as good as we all want him to be. I just think at the end of the day, if Jake Matthews is getting bull rushed by Robert Quinn every snap, then, Alex Mack doesn't do much for you. But if Jake Matthews can stay in front of Robert Quinn, then, Alex Mack is great. He's the cherry on top, I guess, so to speak. But I do think the offense will be improved. Don't get it twisted. I do think they'll be better this year. I don't necessarily see them being light years better, because I do think Sanu, I don't disagree that he's a better outside receiver than a slot receiver. But we'll see how it goes. I would love to be wrong, because as we say on the show often, when I'm wrong, usually good things happen with the Falcons. So
You said you don't disagree that he's a better outside receiver than slot receiver?
I do disagree that he's a better outside. I think he's a much better slot receiver than he's an outside guy. I don't think it's a mistake that they were playing him outside, because I think if Marvin Jones and AJ Green would have been wonderful as slot receivers, but they knew Sanu wasn't very good on the outside, so they played him in the slot because that's where he belonged.
Oh, that's an argument for another day. We'll let them actually get on first.
Well, we know we got some content for future shows. All right. Yeah. Our next question comes from Delible Think. He says, what round of a conditional pick are we likely to lose from the Levici trade this year?
So I was trying to find this one again. The only time that we saw I don't remember seeing anything about a conditional pick.
I saw everywhere I've seen says it's a conditional 6th-round pick. Now, I don't know what the condition is, but so I'm assuming right now it's a conditional 6th-round pick.
Yeah, I mean, I went and I tried finding it on the NFL logs, and it says conditional pick. Doesn't say what the pick is. Doesn't really say anything about it. I've been searching for a while, and all I can find is conditional pick. So hopefully it is a 6th-round pick at most. If Levici starts for 2 straight years at left guard, and the Falcons end up giving up 2 6th-round picks for him, that's honestly not a bad exchange in the long term. A starting left guard for 2 6th-round picks. I do think he'll end up starting again either next year or the year after. I think they're going to try and get a guy in here that needs a year to develop as a 4th-round or a 5th-round pick. Maybe even they like Schweitzer as that long-term left guard. I personally think they do, or that he's the right guy. But I think when you've got Levici and he's in the last year of his contract, and he's been here for 4 years, and then that's when they're finding his replacement, or when they're saying, hey, we're going to train Schweitzer for the job, and you get 4 years of Andy Levici for 2 6th-round picks, I think it's worth it. So I believe it's. I hope it is a 6th-round pick. I hope it's honestly at worst a 7th-round pick, or at best a 7th-round pick.
Yeah. I think. I mean, this is going to be interesting because I do feel like you look at the 11 starters on the team. I think you have 9 out of the 11 starters for 2017 already on the team. So to me, it's the 2 question marks are really the left guard and the right guard, because Chester's on a 1-year deal, and I don't see Levitre coming back next year unless he plays at a really high level this year, which is possible. It's not like Andy Levitre is untalented. So maybe this year he puts it together. He eliminates the penalties and the cohesion that he didn't quite build with Jake Matthews towards the end of the season. Maybe it clicks this year now that he has Matt playing beside him and the communication is better on the offensive line. And he plays at a really high level this year, and he's kept for another year, because I don't think the Falcons want to go into 2017 with 2 new guards. I'm not as high on Schweitzer as Scott is, so I don't necessarily see him as the guy that you're going to sort of plug into that spot, one of those spots next year. So I think ideally the Falcons are going to want to be in a situation where they're only replacing 1 guard. I do think that's where maybe a guy like Mike Person comes into the mix. With another year of development, they might see him as the replacement for Chris Chester or Levitre at one of those guard spots, and then there's 1 vacant spot that they have to fill, either the draft or free agency. So we'll see how it plays out. But as for your question, Delable, everything I've seen since it's a conditional 6th-round pick, I don't know what the conditions are. Is it playing time? Is it Levitre making the roster? I don't know what it is, but it does seem like we're going to give up either a 6th or 7th-round pick next year. So. We'll see how it goes.
Yep.
Okay, is this our last question?
Yeah.
All right. So our last question comes from Delable Think. He says, who do you guess to be the next 4 leaders in receiving targets after Julio next year?
So if Julio is number 1, I'd say number 2 is probably going to be Devontae Freeman again. I'd say number 3 is probably going to be Jacob Tamme or Austin Hooper, whoever really ends up being the de facto number 1 tight end in passing situations. I'd say number 4 is going to be the number 2 wide receiver, which is Mohamed Sanu. And then number 5 will end up being Justin Hardy.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, look, obviously Julio's going to be number 1. I think he's going to get somewhere in the 160, 180 target range. Number 2 has to be Mohamed Sanu. Like, if he's not the number 2, if he doesn't get 110, 120 targets, then he's an absolute bust as a free agent signing. That's just the bottom line. I mean, if you sort of extrapolate Leonard Hankerson's workload over 16 games, what he did in 7 games, he would have been on pace to have 105 targets. Combined, Roddy White and Leonard Hankerson had about like 90 or so. So it's one of those things, if Mohamed Sanu is an upgrade over either one of those 2, and please, God, let him be, he has to get in the 110, at least 120 range to be competent. Then after that, I do think Freeman and Tamme will have a significant drop-off in their targets this year just because of the presence of Sanu, as well as the presence of Hooper. And hopefully Tevin Coleman will carve out a more significant role on 3rd downs, not because of any doubt in Devontae Freeman, but you want to see Tevin Coleman progress as a player, and that means being a much more effective 3rd down player. So probably Freeman probably is your number 3 guy. He probably gets somewhere in the 80 range, and Tammy's probably somewhere in the 60 to 70 range in terms of targets. So those are probably your top 4. Possibility that Hooper gets into the mix, maybe. I don't necessarily see Hooper having a big impact as a rookie, but he is talented, so I wouldn't mind it. Yeah, okay. So guys, that's our show. I hope you appreciate the return to the fold that we had this week after the 2-week layoff. We probably, I don't know. We'll figure it out if we'll be back next week. Hopefully something happens. I'm sure we'll have some OTA stuff to talk about next week if not. If you guys want to get your questions on the show, you can use the hashtag Falcons mailbag. You can tweet at the show's Twitter handle, which is FalconPFC. Of course, I am at FalFans on Twitter. Scott is at Karasik S. Be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes, rate and review us on iTunes. You can find the show as well at ProFootballCentral.com. They have a lot of wonderful shows. If you guys are having a football fix, you can go and check out podcasts about the Lions and the Bills and whatnot. So if you need that to fill your football fix void, if you're not into the NBA Finals or baseball, then you can do that. And that's our show. Oh, I should plug, go check out FalFans.com. I got a Sky report on Deion Jones that came out today. It's Tuesday as we're recording this. You can go check out my report of Keanu Neal. I should be able to get the last 4 Falcons rookies out in the next 2 weeks. I won't have to pull as much weight at work over that period of time. So hopefully in the next 10 to 12 days, I'll finish this draft class, and you guys can see the reports on FalFans.com. So, Scott, you got anything you need to plug?
I don't have anything that I've been working on lately. I've been too busy with work to even really write. Thank God it's basically the off season for writing.
Pretty much. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, thank God, because I did not want to continue writing for 40 hours a week while I was going through this stuff at work.
All right. Well, guys, that's our show. Maybe we'll be back next week, but if we're not, then we'll be back in 2 weeks.
All right.